Welcome into another edition, the first one of the 2019 season of the Dean Legge Show here on Dawg Post. If you're listening to us on iTunes, Instagram Live, YouTube, wherever, or even on the site, go over to dawgpost.com right now, dawgpost.com. You can get 1 month of Dawg Post for $1. Season is going to start here quickly. I sure would take advantage of that. We got thousands of people on Dawg Post every single day. Thousands of subscribers. Oh, I just made a mistake on my computer. And really excited to get the season going. We just did come back from Media Days in Hoover, Alabama. You can see it here. And I'm going to go over some of the stuff that we talked about. If you missed it on the site, definitely would go over there and see some of the things that we had to say. Talked about Kirby and company, obviously a lot of different things going on for the Dogs and everyone else. Alabama picked to win the league by about a 2-to-1 ratio over Georgia. Georgia picked to win the East by about a pretty significant line over the Gators. It was probably something like 2-to-1 as well. But Birmingham is going to lose this event coming next year. It will be in Atlanta. And then on top of that, Nashville will get it the year after that. I'm not as in love with Nashville as a lot of people are, but it will be good not to be in Birmingham. Let me run down what happened on Media Day. So Alabama got 203 to Georgia's 50 votes. So that's actually 4-to-1. I said 3-to-1. So that was to win the league on December 7th in Atlanta. And then it says the Dogs were first place votes 233 to Florida's 21. So that's about 10-to-1. So I missed both of those by a little bit. Alabama had 253 first place votes in the West, which means they got everyone but one by my math. Something like that. So I think the league has stopped the sort of crazy votes from coming out. They don't acknowledge them anymore. I mean, you would get years where, and there are some here. I mean, you got people picking Tennessee and Kentucky to win the East, which is, and Mississippi State to win the West, which is just not going to happen. Mississippi State has never won the West. Doesn't mean they can't in the future, but you get some sort of bizarre picks here. So at the end of the day, the Dogs at 1 in the East. Florida, Missouri is the 3 in front of Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt. Did you ever think you'd see the day when Tennessee would consistently be the 5th place or worst pick in the summer? Alabama, LSU, A&M, Auburn, Texas, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and Arkansas. So Georgia will get a crack at the number 3 and 4 predicted teams. LSU getting picked a solid number 2 behind the Tide. They are it's a little bit tighter in the West than it is in the East, but in terms of all the teams, for instance, first place and third place in the East was 1,700 points to 1789 to 1149. In the West, it was 1813 to 1268. So it was actually tighter between the top 3. But the bottom, everybody is pretty certain Vanderbilt and Arkansas will be the bottom teams. I mean, the fall off from Kentucky to Vanderbilt, 798 to 358, is pretty significant. So more than double. And then obviously Georgia getting picked second. Alabama 203 first place votes, Georgia 49. So what's all of this mean? Not that much. The media has not done a great job picking the winner of the league. They've never correctly picked Georgia when they've won the league 3 times. They've never picked it. And the one time they did pick Georgia to win in 2004, they didn't. So it's tough. I mean, if you walked around Media Days, you would know. It's kind of a little bit like the Star Wars convention, Star Wars bar scene at the convention there in Birmingham. But I really want to get into some of the things that were said. This time of year reminds me a lot of the Dave Matthews song, So Much to Say. Everybody's got something to say at Media Days. and probably because they're being asked so many questions. But let's listen to Jake Fromm's response to one of the, I would say, stranger questions. It's about how Justin Fields, how will he respond to not having chance of we want Justin in the background.
Joe Bombo, SB Nation Radio. How great does it feel to know that this year, when you have a bad drive, you're not going to hear those "We want Fields" chants?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was never focused on anything. I never heard any outside noise last year. So, I'm still going to be just as hard on myself this year as I was last year. It's all about how can I make the team better? How can I go out and play my best? And I think, it doesn't matter really who's behind me, or I'm going to compete with myself and go out and try to be the best football player I can be.
Well, that never happened. I was at every single game last year, and no one ever chanted for Justin Fields to play that I remember. The only chants about Justin was very ugly and really resulted in a player getting suspended or kicked off the team for the baseball team, and maybe perhaps eventually was one of the reasons why Justin left Georgia to go to Ohio State. But I thought Jake handled the question perfectly adequate there. He was the focus of a lot of stuff at Media Days. Let's listen to what Kirby had to say about Jake at Media Days and sort of his respect for his quarterback.
I mean, this guy is the epitome of what college football is about. Number one, he stands up for the right things. He's very strong in his faith. He lives it. I mean, he lives it and he breathes it, and he does that with our players in a way that is not rubbing it in their face. And I have a lot of respect for his ability to be who he is, be confident in who he is, and still lead our team, and not create any jealousy while he's doing it. So it's a lot of credit given to his parents and his upbringing, because they have done a tremendous job with all their sons. And he's got a brother that's going to be at Auburn, which creates a unique situation. But he is a great young man.
Well, it's hard to argue against what Kirby said there. And, I mean, he would know. When you start talking about the time that that Kirby got the job, they had to re-win Jacob Eason. That happened. And then they had to go out and get the next quarterback. If you are not a member of Dawg Post, I would certainly suggest you sign up this week. And here's why. Next week, we've got a story on Jake Fromm that is long, for sure. That's not the best part of it. It's very detailed. We talked with a lot of people around him and that are in his life about who he really is. We talk with insiders about some of the behind-the-scenes things that happened before, when he got there during the 2017 and 2018 season. And I don't say this often, but it's, from the reporting that we've gotten, it really does seem like what you see is what you get with Fromm. I do think he's, what he portrays publicly is basically what you get. He's a little bit dorky too. I think people would say that. I don't think there's any wrong with admitting that. Anyone who's watched him sing would know that. But he is comfortable in himself. And I think that's what made people so comfortable with him taking over at quarterback when Jacob got hurt. There were two really big moments in Jake Fromm's career so far. Both of them in 2017. The first was when he led the team to the game-winning field goal on the game-winning field goal drive against Notre Dame. I mean, Georgia was sort of running out of time. There was about 4 or 6 minutes left, whatever it was, and Rodrigo kicked the field goal with, I think, about 3 or 2 minutes left. There wasn't much left, and then Davin Bellamy took over from there. And then the other drive, which was really much more on Jake's shoulders, was the final drive of the Rose Bowl for Georgia's offense. And I think something like 6 of 8 plays, it was on his arm. He had to do it, and he did. He took him down the field. He grew up. I mean, the question always with a quarterback is, do they have what it takes to win the ball game? And I was always, Hudson Mason is a great example of do they have what it takes? Because physically, Hudson was not ideal. Well, Jake Fromm, some people would say he's not physically ideal either. But they're comparing him to sort of these freaks that have been around like Justin, Jacob Eason, etc. When Hudson took Georgia down the field to win the game against Georgia Tech in 2014, I'll just tell you right now, I was shocked. He was not who you would think you could lean on to do that sort of stuff. Fromm, obviously, a much better quarterback in terms of gifts and so forth, but he did that against Oklahoma, and he did all you could do against Alabama in 2017. So and yet in both instances against a team that he had committed to years ago, he came up one play short. And one of the plays he was on the field in 2018 when that 30-yard ball wasn't received by a Georgia player. And then in 2017 when he wasn't on the field, but he had, scored he had been on the field enough to not go backwards. And Rodrigo kicked a very important field goal for the Dogs. So Jake Fromm is a very important player at Georgia, a very important person in the Kirby Smart era. We could be waiting this fall to see Jake Fromm play his first snaps. I mean, you don't know. Jacob Eason was certainly expected to be 3 and out, and this would have been the third year in 2018, and instead he's in Washington doing his thing. I know I'm cheering for Jacob. I think a lot of people are. I hope they are at least. Other things from media days, I think I'll run this clip again. This is an Alabama linebacker talking about what the toughest game has been so far for him in college football.
Dean Legge from Dawg Post. I wanted to ask you you probably played dozens of games in college. What's the toughest game you played in, and why do you remember it being the toughest game?
The toughest game I played in was the Georgia game last year in the SEC Championship. And the reason I say that is because it was a very aggressive game on both sides of the ball. Georgia came with it, we came with it, and I just remember after that game, I just felt like I got into a brawl. My entire body was hurting. It took me a couple of days to get back healthy and all that, to take care of myself. But that was one of the hardest games I ever played in.
That was Dylan Moses. That was me asking the question, but that was Dylan Moses talking about the Georgia game in 2018 and how physical it was. I think, and that really triggered a lot of people, a lot of Clemson people specifically. And he wasn't saying that was the worst that he had lost. He was saying it was the toughest game that he had played in. And I think the thing that gets people so aggravated that are Clemson fans or ACC fans or Oklahoma fans, I would say Clemson and Oklahoma. I don't know if there are ACC fans, but is that, they're saying, hey, you don't just have to play football in a phone booth. There's other ways to play football, and they're right. I also think there's no reason to go completely crazy because a kid says a particular thing. I mean, we've got Trevor Lawrence calling out Paul Feinbaum. I don't know that I understand that at all. I don't understand that at all completely. I mean, the kids are kids, and I get that, but it just, this sounds bad too, but Paul Feinbaum should be beneath Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence never lost a football game in college. He's not lost that many games, period. He shouldn't be concerned about, what Paul has to say. And by the way, what Paul said was correct in my view. If you think Notre Dame was in the same stratosphere as Alabama, you're nuts. So I don't know. But it's not, what we do for a living shouldn't really be fodder, for the kids on Twitter. And you'd say, well, why didn't you say that last year with the Georgia kids and the leaving them out of the playoff? Well, first of all, they were correct. They should have been in the playoff, no doubt. They should have been in the playoff. But they weren't fighting with any one person. They were fighting a system. I think there's some nuance involved there. Maybe I'm wrong to feel that way. But if I were the kids, whoever they are, we don't matter. You know, what people say or write about you, it doesn't matter, or write about your peers. It doesn't matter what we say. We can't control anything. The kids can, though. They totally can. And I've always felt this way about, and this does go back to the Georgia being left out of the playoff thing. I have always felt like people, the teams that are disciplined with message discipline, it's a very good indicator of where their focus is. And I don't think that's a stretch to say. The message discipline for this Georgia team in 2019? All these years are rolling together for me. The message discipline has been very good to great, I would say. They all but ignored the J.J. Holloman discussion, and it's never comfortable bringing those things up in public like that anyway. But I was with Jake Fromm, maybe not an hour, but something like that, and he probably had receiver questions 15 times, something like that. Maybe that's too many. Maybe it was more like 10 or 12. But he just didn't, he just kind of didn't really worry about it and moved on to the next thing. And I think that does, as an athlete, you do want to be able to move on to the next thing, whatever that is. And in this case, it's to the next game, which for Georgia will be, I keep wanting to say Austin P. And I know it's not Austin P. I know it is Vanderbilt University. Let's just talk about the Vanderbilt game for a second. When you look at Derek Mason and what he's done at Vanderbilt, he has had some solid wins. He's had some very good close losses, including to Notre Dame last year. But they have a brutal schedule. Them and South Carolina really have tough schedules this year. But let's listen to Derek Mason, the Vanderbilt coach, talk about the first game of the season and what he thinks will happen when Georgia arrives.
Man, it's about what happens between the white lines. You talk about atmosphere. You got to get on the football field and play a game. And I think, that's what Coach Orgeron's all about, and that's what we're about too. Man, we're gonna line up and play some football. Man, I've got nothing but respect, for him and his program. But really, it starts with Georgia. So we're gonna start with Georgia, then we're gonna go to Purdue, and then we'll play LSU at our place. And all three of those games will have a lot of excitement and fanfare. So let's get it. John, I love it. I got a lot of respect for Kirby Smart. Man, we spent some time together this summer, at the Nike coaches trip, and I felt like we were kindred spirits, man. We're brothers from another mother. I mean, it truly felt that way. I believe that this schedule sets up well for us. I mean, you open with Georgia. It's a conference game. I think I've got a pretty good football team, but it's untested, so we get a chance to test it. I know Kirby's going to bring in, his crew. They'll be ready to play, and I'll get a chance to see Cortez Hankton, my former receivers coach, man, who's now at Georgia. He gets a chance to see the gang. I mean, it's going to be a fun game. It's going to be a lot on it, and we look to play good football. So do they.
And Georgia has consistently showed up for that game. I remember in the 90s when Georgia would play. I mean, 2009 even, Georgia Vanderbilt game, which was just not a good game. Georgia had a lot of fans there for that game. So I think that Georgia should expect to see a bunch of red. That game kicks at 7:30 on the ESPN, on the SEC network, which of course is on the family of ESPN. We'll talk more and more about that game as time goes on. Stay tuned on Tuesday, more from the Dean Legge Show, and we will review, whatever happens between today and then, and if not, I'll talk more about media days. Kendall Milton, Kendall Baker, an old offensive lineman. Kendall Milton will be committing to someone next Monday, and Dawg Post will be there for that as well in California. So stay tuned to Dawg Post, DAWGPOST.com. If you're on Instagram, you should go follow us on YouTube. Now listen, I can't stream live to Instagram, so you should be going to YouTube. If you're watching this on Instagram, you need to go follow us on YouTube, period. Actually, everyone should go follow us on YouTube. Dean Legge Show signing off. We'll see you on Tuesday night.